I learned something very powerful in that journey. I learned that more honest I become about who I want to become, I attracted the right people and the right conversations. It was like going through the change. You don't take everything with you in who you are becoming, but in the same time, you find people who are speaking your language, who understand your challenge, that people who went through similar reinvention. And often growth begins when we stop trying to belong to a space we have already outgrown.
Welcome to Evoke Greatness, the podcast for bold leaders and big dreamers who refuse to settle. I'm your host, Sonnie, CEO, entrepreneur, and someone who's spent over 20 years building, leading, and learning what it really takes to rise. Every step of that journey has taught me something worth passing on. Lessons in business, leadership, resilience, and the psychology behind it all. Here, you'll hear raw conversations, unfiltered truths, and the kind of wisdom that ignites something deeper in you, your courage, your conviction, and your calling. This show will help you think bigger, lead better, and show up bolder in every part of your life and business. This is your place to grow. Let's rise together. Welcome back to another episode of Evoke Greatness. What happens when the very strengths that built your success start working against you? Today's guest has spent over 2 decades studying that exact question, from boardrooms across 5 continents to the coaching work she does now. Laura Patac is a Gallup-Certified CliftonStrengths coach, author, storyteller, and creator of the Strengths Velocity Lab, a framework that helps high performers turn their lived experience and natural strengths into strategic advantage. After a 25-year career in global corporate leadership, Laura made a pivotal identity shift of her own, trading executive titles for the work of helping others see themselves more clearly. She's the author of Whole, Not Perfect, and Stories with Purpose, and the co-founder of Edgecraft. Her work sits at the intersection of performance, identity, and what it truly takes to grow beyond the version of yourself that got you here. Today, we're diving into why high performers get stuck at the exact moment that they should be growing, and why breaking through isn't about working harder or smarter, but about something much deeper, who you believe you are. Laura, welcome to the show.
Hello, Sonnie. Very nice meeting you, and hello to your listeners and viewers.
I'm looking forward to diving into this conversation with you.
Awesome. So let's just dive in.
All right. Well, you talk about strengths quietly becoming traps for high performers. Can you walk us through what that actually looks like? What does it feel like from the inside when that's happening?
Well, I will talk at the beginning before talking about the disconnect and how strengths sometimes become traps. I would like to talk a bit about what's happening sometimes with the high performing people during their career. And I'll share a bit of a story, because when I looked back at my career, there was a period in my life where externally everything looked very successful. I had a global executive career. I lived and worked across 7 countries on 5 continents. I led very large initiatives. I traveled constantly, traveled the world. And from the outside, everything looked like I had built the kind of life like many people aspire to have. But internally, something very different was happening. At some point, I realized that achievement was not longer creating alignment. That the milestones were still there, the performance was still there, but the meaning behind them started fading. And that was a very, I would say, brutal and confronting realization, because nobody teaches us how to navigate that moment when life that once represented success no longer feels connected to who we are becoming. What I came to understand is that reinvention is rarely dramatic. It's usually very quiet. And it begins with reflection, with honesty, but also recognizing the patterns we carry. And here is where actually we are connecting patterns with strengths. Because what patterns are, they are defined and built over time by our strengths talking very loud in moments of pressure, and those kind of natural talents which we do possess even we don't know that we have it. And just to give you an example, one of my top 5 strengths, it's responsibility, and how responsibility is manifesting for me is that I take responsibility and I walk the talk for everything that I say I do, I will be doing. So what I say that I do, I actually do it and I deliver. Now, under pressure and in life, my responsibility was so loud that I was taking responsibilities which were not mine to take first. And in career, that could be reflected in moments where actually you want to prove yourself and you want to get a seat at the table. So therefore, you take over responsibilities and you raise your hand for things which might not be necessarily yours. It doesn't mean that that experience is not helping you evolve in some areas. But on the other hand, if you don't calibrate that strength, it could lead very easily to burnout, because you add not only to your plate when you take those responsibilities, but you add to someone else's plate as well. And you have to be very mindful of that, and also to be very mindful what that new responsibility means not only for you, but also for the others around you. Therefore, for me, when we are talking about patterns and the patterns that are driven by strengths, it's very important to identify not only our strengths, but to identify also our patterns driven by strengths. And we need to question the definition of success we may have inherited but never consciously choose. Because in different seasons of life, success might have very different definitions. And for me, reinvention was not about becoming someone else. It was about integrating more intentionally who I already was, my strengths, my values, my voice, my purpose, and the kind of impact I truly wanted to create. Yeah. So that today is reflected in the fact that I do work and I do help high-performing professionals to deeply connect to that journey over the seasons of life, over their career, connected with their direction, and use their strengths, then they value and their purpose being integrated in that direction and who they are becoming in every season of life.
I love the fact that you recognize the seasonality, because we are at different seasons at different points in our life, and there really has to be a sense of awareness around that. I first recognized the seasonality of life in reading a book. I was reading The Compound Effect and absolutely loved the book and how I could kind of habit stack and make some things produce better outcomes. And it was about a year later and I read the book again. And I got something very different from the book because I was in a different season of my life. And so that brought a heightened sense of awareness around the seasonality and how the lens that we view the world and our success and what's meaningful to us is very dependent on the season that you're in. So I love that that was an element of your story of how that kind of unfolded.
Yes, because one of the realizations through my own process of like reinvention and the realizations I had is that the definition of success changes with the seasons of life, because what fulfilled you when you were 30 may not fulfill you as you are 50. Right. And I think one of the healthiest things which we can do is to allow ourselves to redefine success consciously instead of staying loyal to an old version or old definition of success. Because, for example, for a season of life, maybe when you are like in your 20s or 30s, maybe success means achievement. Maybe as you go to close to 40, maybe success means contribution. For others, depending where they are in the season of life or culture, success might mean peace or impact. And maybe when you are 50, success is not necessarily achievement, but it's more alignment with you, with internally, with who you are, with what you want to leave behind in life. So to me, the danger is not changing. The danger is continuing to live according to a definition of success that not longer belongs to you.
It's like shedding a skin, shedding something that no longer serves you and letting that, there's a death to it, right? There's a death when something is no longer serving you and it's not useful to you and you're letting go of that. And with that though, have you experienced that there is some sort of grieving process to the loss or the what you're letting go?
Yeah, it's a very there are some hard realizations, and I can speak about my process, and maybe that's going to be insightful, because when I'm saying that success, I like saying success and significance, but significance, when I talk about significance, I talk about that internal alignment, and that's when success and significance are not the same thing, first of all, right? And I think that the hardest realization in adulthood is understanding exactly this thing, that the external success and the internal fulfillment are not automatically connected. What I'm seeing, and I'm seeing among, all high performers and people having like rich careers, I see that, spending years in building careers based on responsibility, and I just talked about the responsibility, achievement, validation, and performance. These things, they create opportunities, they create financial stability, recognition, and growth. But at some point, many people quietly reach a season where they realized that I build a successful life, but I no longer feel connected to that life. That's a very, very hard realization, because that disconnect can feel very confusing, because nothing is technically wrong. Life is good to outside, but internally you struggle. So technically you look good for the rest of the world, right? But internally, what I felt, and talking with many high professionals, it feels that the energy changes. The excitement is not longer there. The work becomes emotionally flat. You are flat emotionally. You are just like, going every day through life, but not enjoying life. And achievements, actually, they are not longer creating meaning. And that moment is important, because that moment often becomes the beginning of reinvention. But to have the ability and the awareness to recognize that and to really be truthful to yourself, that's very hard.
Okay, quick pause to tell you about my partners at Row Nutrition. I came to them as a customer first. I have both Hashimoto's and I am smack dab in the middle of perimenopause. Their liposomal supplements have been a game changer for my brain fog, fatigue, and inflammation. I'm currently taking their NAD+, glutathione, and curcumin, and I recently added in both collagen and creatine. Anyone who knows me knows I only put my name behind what I actually use, and Row has earned it. You can use the code SONNIE15, SONNIE15 for 15% off at rownutrition.com, or you can click the link in the show notes and it'll take you right there. All right, let's hop back into the episode. This conversation is going to serve so many. Large portion of my audience are women who are in the senior and executive space, and they have gone through many seasons in their time, oftentimes where what you're doing is seeking an external validation. You're not necessarily stepping into your voice or really owning your space. And then all of a sudden you get to a season where you think, wait a second, why am I putting on this mask, if you will, for others? Why am I not doing what fully serves me in the process? So I'm curious, what role does external validation play in keeping people stuck or keeping people small?
Well, external validation, it's very connected to perfectionism in my experience, because we try to look perfect to the external world and to get that validation that you have the perfect career, that you are shining wherever you go, that you have success whatever you do in your life, and so on. And that actually is just that face to the external world, which in fact creates the misalignment with who you already are, because that wholeness, that integration, which actually you have internally between your strengths, your values, your purpose, if you cannot display that to the external world, that is where the conflict begins. Because it's like you are playing a role, or you are playing in a movie that you haven't been cast to. So to me, and to me, that is the real courage to really pause. And I'd like to talk a bit about, pausing and that kind of silence, which amplifies patterns. Because one of the biggest lessons during my transition was realizing how loud our patterns becomes in silence. Because when you are having a very hype career with so many responsibilities, teams which you are driving, you might be also a parent. You might have responsibilities at home. You are like on a treadmill all the time. You are always running. And when that disconnect is happening, some people ignore it, but some others, they step back and they take that kind of time to really understand what's going on, and how those kind of patterns that become visible, and the discrepancy become very, very visible. So, because when we stop constantly performing, producing, solving, and reacting, we start noticing over responsibility. We start noticing people pleasing behaviors. We start noticing perfectionism, fear of disappointing others, difficulty of asking for help. That was one of my biggest challenge, to be able to raise the hand for help, because I was always the person solving everything for everybody by myself. Or the overachievement tied to self-worth. So when we start noticing all these patterns, actually what I realized that I had built an identity around carrying everything and taking responsibilities for everything. And for years, that pattern looked like strength. But I understood that there is an emotional cost behind that. And the emotional cost for me was almost, a burnout. The emotional cost was that I felt lost inside me, and I had to take a step back in order to reconnect with who I am.
How does someone approach the process of getting quiet and pausing when we've gotten so used to a busy day, a busy life, a busy job, a busy mind? And in the moments when we have the opportunity to quiet down, oftentimes we fill that with screens or mindless social media. How does someone capture the opportunity to get quiet?
I think it has to be very intentional and very meaningful. Something almost like a personal responsibility to yourself, to create that white space where you can really digest all those emotions and to make a sense of it. There are also, for me, started with questions, because sometimes questions are the answers. And questions like, if I take away the title and the job description, what I'm really good at, what I enjoy doing, what is still meaningful for me, what brings me energy. I realized that there were activities or things which actually they were really draining my energy, not because I didn't know how to do it. It's because it was my place and my values, my purpose. I was not aligned anymore with what I was doing, because I was in a season of life when actually I wanted to create legacy, more meaningful things, and to stop creating achievements and performance. And stepping back and taking the time, I do believe that it's something which everyone has to be responsible for and very intentionally to create, because reinvention actually it's about reflection and reframing. You have to allow things time to reflect and also to understand exactly what is the story that brought you there, what are those patterns, and what you want to keep with you as patterns, and what you want to leave behind. And there is one thing, and nobody talks enough about the emotional loneliness sometimes in these moments, because there is an emotional loneliness in, it's like an identity transition, because when you are trying to move away from a version of yourself that people recognize and validate, you temporarily enter a space where your new direction is not fully clear yet. And that is a very uncomfortable space. It's like you knew exactly who you were before, but you don't know exactly where you want to go, and you are in that limbo. And in that limbo, people around you may not understand your choices, and you may lose connection with environments and people that who once defined you. And you might question yourself like 100 times. But I also learned something very powerful in that journey. I learned that more honest I become about who I want to become, I attracted the right people and I attracted the right conversations. It was like going through the change. Yes, you might disconnect from patterns, but also circles. You don't take everything with you in who you are becoming, but in the same time, you find people who are speaking your language, who understand your challenge, that people who went through similar reinvention, and they become your support and become your circle. And often growth begins when we stop trying to belong to a space we have already outgrown.
Okay, that's a wrap on part 1. Make sure to come back next week for part 2, where Laura is going to break down what an identity shift actually looks like when you're in the middle of it, how to stop using your strengths on autopilot and start using them with intention, and the framework she uses with high performers to help them get unstuck and start moving toward who they're actually becoming. Okay, stay with me for just a second before you go. Living with Hashimoto's and being in the middle of perimenopause means brain fog shows up in the middle of conversations, decisions, and moments that matter. And I refuse to stay there. I'm very selective about what I put in my body. Intentional. So when Meraki Blue came to me wanting to support this community, I said yes because I already believed in what they do. Methylene Blue, mitochondrial health, cognitive performance, mental clarity. It works for me. I want it to work for you too. Meraki Blue is giving the Evoke Greatness community 20% off. Use the code EVOKEGREATNESS, all caps, no spaces at checkout. I promise you, your brain isn't broken. It's just waiting on the right support. If today's episode challenged you, moved you, or lit a fire in your soul, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who's ready to rise in their leadership, their business, and their life. And if you haven't already, I'd be so grateful if you took 30 seconds to rate and review the podcast. It's one of the most powerful ways to support the show and help us reach more bold leaders like you. Because this isn't just a podcast, it's a movement. We're not here to play small. We're here to lead loud and elevate how we think, lead, and execute, one bold and unapologetic step at a time. Until next time, stay bold, stay grounded, and make moves that make mediocre uncomfortable.